Hi, I'm Karen Lunchbaugh at the University of Idaho, and today we're going to talk about the forage value of plants for both livestock and wildlife. And on the other side, we're also going to talk about some poisonous plants and some factors that are truly detrimental to foragers out on the range. When we talk about the forage value of plants, we're going to divide compounds into sort of two categories, those that create energy and those that are nutrients, which are important for growth and development of the animal. So let's start with energy. Just like us, when we eat something, we look on the label and we see how many calories it is. Energy is calories. On the range, energy is in sort of three different groups. The first would be structural carbohydrates. The most abundant source of energy or carbohydrates in the plant kingdom is cellulose. Cellulose are the cell walls and the structure of the plant. Of course, we as humans, we can't digest cellulose, but ruminant animals and hindgut fermenters like horses and rabbits, they have a relationship with microbes. So the microbes in their gut can digest the cellulose and create energy forms that the animal then can use. The second really accessible form of energy are sugars and starches. Animal or plants, some store energy in the form of starch, and when they have photosynthesis, they create sugars immediately. So that sweet and starchy flavor of plants is what animals are going for. Fats are important, especially for birds and rodents who don't have very expansive digestive systems, but they're not very common. So fats would be important in nuts and some roots and some flowers and seeds. So they're not abundant on the range, but they are important when they're there. Next category of compounds would be nutrients. First of all, protein. We all know that protein is important for animals, and those are the nitrogenous compounds in the plant. There's a lot of minerals in plants and in the environment, but we're going to focus on phosphorus because phosphorus is the most limited mineral on rangelands. It's needed in high quantities, and there's not enough of it generally, so we worry about being phosphorus deficient. Also, there are a lot of vitamins. The one that we highlight the most is carotene or vitamin A, again, because animals need it and there's not a lot of it. And especially vitamin A is in green plants. So in the winter, we worry about not having enough carotene or vitamin A. So what affects these categories of compounds in plants? What affects whether plants are good sources of energy and nutrients? When you get right down to it, there's just three major factors that affect that. The first is the relationship between cell walls and cell contents. How much cell contents does a plant have in comparison to how much cell walls are in its structure? The second is how lignified is it? We'll talk about lignification. And then the third factor is if the plant has other compounds like toxins that create anti-quality or they're against quality. So let's start with cell structure. When you look at cell structure, we're looking at how much of the plant is made up of cell walls compared to cell solubles. In the middle of the cell of a plant is all of the good soluble things, the sugars, the starches, organic acids, and protein. Those are all things that really provide the nutrients and energy that are needed for animals. They're inside, in the middle of the cell. Of course, the plant is using those just to do its business of photosynthesis and growth, but the animal is able to use those as sources of nutrients and energy. Cell wall is made up mostly of cellulose, but also hemicellulose and pectin. There are some compounds in the cell wall that are not digestible, like lignin and silica, and cutin just kind of ties it all together, not very digestible either. So you have this cell that is made on the outside of this packaging that is not very digestible, except for the cellulose, which is used for energy. And inside that is all the soluble stuff. So a plant that has lots of cell solubles in relation to cell walls is going to be more nutritious. Second factor is lignification. On this diagram is a picture of lignin. I'm not going to ask that you memorize that. I just want you to know it's really a complex structure. Because it's so complex and so highly bound, it is not digestible. It is the compound that binds cellulose together to form wood. So it's this complex structure that sort of impregnates and wraps around the strands of cellulose in the cell, in the plant's walls, and it forms wood. And wood is not digestible. And so Plants that don't have a lot of lignin are more digestible than those that do have a lot of lignin. The third set of factors are just a whole group of compounds that do one of two things. They are not digestible themselves, they reduce the digestibility of nutrients, or they simply adversely affect the animal. No matter which of these mechanisms the compound uses, they all make the plant unpalatable. So things that are not really nutritious and delicious are called unpalatable or not desirable. Anti-quality factors, especially toxins, are more common in forbs and shrubs than grasses, and we'll talk about that. There's a whole bunch of plant compounds in plants that they're difficult to describe, so we just lump them in this whole category called anti-quality, things that reduce the quality or the forage value of the plant. Two kind of categories of those anti-quality factors. One are things that inhibit digestion. They reduce or inhibit digestion. Another is categories of things that are truly directly affecting the animal and causing illness or death. So inhibitors are things that, first of all, they might bind with other nutrients in the plant and reduce digestibility. An example of this is tannins. A lot of plants have tannins in them, and that name, when you tan a hide, you can use tannin or tannin-like substances that bind with proteins and compounds in the hide to make them resistant to microbial degradation, so they don't essentially spoil or go bad. They become stable because of the tannins, because the tannins binded with proteins in the hide. Another kind of category is a group of compounds in the plant that kill microbes or inhibit the microbial growth in the gut. Up here, the top picture is sagebrush. Sagebrush has terpenes. The terpenes in sagebrush aren't terribly deadly, but when they go into the gut, they can kill some of the rumen microbes, and then that reduces the efficiency of the rumen environment, and it reduces digestibility. Another set of compounds would be truly directly affecting the animal, causing illness or death. Those are toxins. Talk about those next. So you probably have an idea of what a toxic or poisonous plant is, but what is it? How would you define a toxic plant? Well, the definition is really pretty simple. It's just a plant compound that causes negative digestive or physiological effects. Those effects are huge. There's a wide variety of effects. It could be everything from death, birth defects, reproductive dysfunction. For example, females that are no longer cycling, they're not having young, bloat, dermatitis. There could be neurological disorders, tremors, inability to walk or control your muscles, etc., etc., etc. There's many things that plants do that cause illness in animals. Interestingly, many of these compounds that are toxic are also good medicine. So used at the right dose, some of these are also medicinal value. So we're going to talk about a whole series of classes of compounds, toxic agents in plants. We'll talk about alkaloids, glycosides, nitrates, soluble oxalates, tannins, essential oils, compounds that cause photosensitization, and also compounds that cause dermatitis. So I'm just going to go through these groups one at a time, and they will give examples of how animals avoid these plants and what we can do for management. We're going to start with alkaloids because they're some of the most powerful toxic plant substances that we deal with. These are going to sound pretty familiar. Things like caffeine, morphine, codeine, heroin, cocaine. Those are all alkaloids. They're water soluble. They are effective in fairly small quantities. And they have some characteristics that make them dangerous, such as they remain toxic even after the plant matures or freezes. The real linchpin and the whole reason that alkaloids are so effective is because they're effective in small quantities and they affect the nervous system. They cause nervous disorders, shakiness. There's a plant called crazy weed, makes the animal be crazy and sort of go around in circles. And that's dangerous because this negative reinforcement is part of the skin defense system. So it's hard for animals to learn to avoid something they ate that makes them fidgety or nervous several hours later. So the skin defense system is really not very effective for compounds like this where there's a long delay between eating and the effect. And it's because they don't actually make the animals sick unless they're eaten in very large quantities. They usually don't cause nauseousness. And the gut defense system requires nauseous feedback. So again, alkaloids are effective because they are effective in small quantities. They affect the nervous system, the skin defense system, so they are hard for the animal to learn to avoid. So let's take a look at a few plants that contain alkaloids. Lupins and locoweeds. There's many different kinds of locoweeds and lupins, and they contain alkaloids. They're often not deadly because animals can learn to avoid them, or they have to be eaten in fairly high quantities. But they definitely can cause negative effects, such as locoweeds. Those are crazy weeds, and the animal, if they eat too much, they'll just go around in circles and they'll look crazy and shaky. So they can be deadly. They also, as I mentioned before, some lupins, for example, cause birth defects. The one that's most challenging for livestock producers on western lands are larkspurs. Tall larkspur, for example, is the plant that causes more livestock deaths than any other toxic plant in western North America. So they can be quite deadly. If animals eat those plants, they can die quite quickly. Their nervous system just takes over and they can't breathe or circulate blood, so they die. Also, tall larkspur is interesting because it has these big leafy leaves, so animals are attracted to that leaf. Other plants, bitterweeds in the southwest, we have bitterweed plants that can cause death. You probably know about poison hemlock or water hemlock. They're both very deadly. They can cause significant deaths. Again, animals will eat them and their system will just shut down. Glycosides is another group of compounds that are common in range plants. In some range plants anyway. They naturally occur in many plants and forages. Their action on the animals is that they block the transport of oxygen and release in the blood, so the animal essentially suffocates to death because the oxygen is not transported in its blood. They can be highly toxic, causing death. They don't usually provide negative post-ingestive feedback, so it's hard for animals to learn to avoid them. And they vary highly in time and space. So glycosides may be in a plant and not in a toxic form, and then, for example, it might freeze or get really hot and they'll change into the toxic form. So careful management to prevent high ingestion levels is really important. As I mentioned, one of the really dangerous things about glycosides is that they can change a lot depending on environmental conditions. So one example is Johnson grass. There aren't many toxins in Johnson grass, but Johnson grass can have compounds in it that become toxic. So prussic acid that could have this cyanogenic effect if the plant gets stressed by freezing or by heat. So a plant like Johnson grass could be fine all the time, and then some environmental change happens and the plant becomes toxic. The next three on this list, chokecherry, mountain mahogany, and serviceberry, also have that same characteristic. They're interestingly all members of the Rosaceae family. So many members of that family have this glycosides in them, cyanogenic glycosides. And in fact, there is an old lore that in Egyptian and Roman era, the way that they would punish some people is they would give them what they called the penalty of the peach. And a peach is also a member of the Rosaceae, and they would harvest peaches. They would chomp up the seeds, grind them up, and feed them to people, or give them forcefully to people, and the people would die. So that penalty of the peach was those cyanogenic compounds inside the fruit inside the seed of fruits from the Rosaceae family. So it's nothing to be light about, but we don't usually have big problems with these plants with livestock. Those, if you know anything about wildlife management, chokecherry, mountain mahogany, serviceberry are very important plants for wildlife. And the way that they get by is just that they're not toxic very often. Some other compounds of plants, such as in the desert southwest, burr buttercup is common. One plant that we have trouble with is white clover. When it's grown in hay fields, it can become toxic again, just because of environmental conditions. Nitrites are also a problem because they can accumulate in plants. So if you have situations like high nitrogen soil, drought, low light conditions, or if you have treatment with some herbicides such as 2,4-D, plants can accumulate nitrogen, and then nitrogen changes to nitrates in the animal's body, and it goes from nitrate to nitrite, which blocks the ability of blood to carry oxygen, so the animal again suffocates. It doesn't usually cause illness or aversion, and that's another reason that nitrates are challenging to manage for, because Environmental conditions can change them, and the animal has a hard time learning that that food is making them sick because the food doesn't make them sick. Plants that contain nitrates would be things such as Russian thistle, silver nightshade. Those are both plants that we often find in the desert southwest. Kochia, careless weed. Many of these are members of the chenopode family. So chenopodes often have this characteristic of accumulating nitrates. Another class of compounds that affect animals on rangelands are oxalates. Oxalates occur pretty commonly in plants that are in the salt desert shrub communities. They have an unique mechanism where they chelate with cations, and especially calcium. So they form these complexes with compounds like calcium, and they form insoluble crystallized salts. And what those crystallized salts do is that they cause damage to vessels, blood and urinary vessels, just any transport in the animal's body. So death can be quite quick, or it can be delayed for several hours. The reason it's of interest is because it's mostly toxic to sheep, and there have been catastrophic losses of sheep across the Great Basin. Wells, Nevada, in 1942, one of the first losses recorded was 160 sheep. But even as late as 1971, the picture there is 1,250 sheep that died from overingestion of halogeton, which is an oxalate containing plant. So this is the reason that we do study oxalates, because they can be really deadly. Interestingly, they're much more deadly to sheep than cattle. Occasionally you'll hear about problems with cattle, but not very often. Many plants in the salt desert do contain oxalates. They can be highly variable, from just a few percentage to up to 30% of the biomass of a plant being composed of oxalates. Some of the ones that are most dangerous, what we mentioned before, is halogeton. It's a plant that has caused many of these large losses of sheep across the West. It's just a slow-growing annual plant that was introduced to the Great Basin, but it is found commonly throughout the basin, especially in disturbed sites. Greasewood is also a plant that can accumulate oxalate, and it's a native shrub that's found in the Great Basin. Now we'll switch gears a little bit to compounds that are common in plants, but it takes a lot to cause damage. So these are often called quantitative toxic compounds. And the first among those is tannins. What tannins do is they reduce protein digestion. And so they don't usually cause nausea, leading to aversions, unless they're eaten in very high quantities. This term might be familiar to you. We talk about tanning hides. So originally, when they tanned hides, they took tannins from plants and they rubbed them on a hide. And because of that characteristic of reducing digestion, it was a way to tan the hide and keep it from being degraded by bacteria, etc. So that's where that word tannin might sound familiar to you. What tannins do is they decrease weight because they do grab onto these proteins in the gut. Usually it's proteins of the other forages, other plants in the gut, but it can even be the gut tissue itself can get hardened by tannins. They're lethal in very high quantities, but this is not very common. One example or one exception is oak poisoning. For some reason, there are some very volatile compounds or liable compounds in oak tannins that can create death in animals. So some plants that contain tannins would include oak brushes. Most oak do, and if you've ever collected acorns, you will, if you break them open with your hands, you'll know that your thumbs kind of get black, and you'll see that tanning effect. Blackbrush, which is a plant common in the southwest, southern Utah area, it is called blackbrush because it does turn black with tannins. Mule's ear is another plant. If you've ever tried to collect it and take it home, it has a very strong smell. And if it sits for a while, it just turns black. So those beautiful leaves will just turn black. So all of those are plants that contain tannins. Essential oils or terpenes are also common in rangeland plants, and it takes very high quantities to cause death in animals, but they can cause a lot of problems for digestion. They're called essential because they have an essence. These terpenes give a plant a distinctive odor. For example, the smell of sage or the smell of pine, those are essential oils that you're smelling. What their main effect in animals is they kill rumen microbes. They kill microbes. So historically, for decades, people have used pine and put it into solutions to get rid of bacteria in their houses or in manufacturing or in their environment. So that pine sol effect is created by those terpenes in the pine plant. If an animal eats too many of those terpenes, then they can kill rumen microbes and kind of shut the gut down so that the animal might lose weight because it's not digesting very effectively. They do cause illness and nausea, but usually at very high quantities. And the most common thing we see with the consumption of terpenes is just weight loss, again, because digestion can be compromised. So they are lethal in very high quantities, but we don't hear about it very much because it takes very high quantities. Some plants that contain essential oils are plants like sagebrush, juniper, and pine. And again, if you take those plants and you crush up those leaves, they have a very distinctive odor, and that odor is from the essential oils. So they are common throughout the West. Another interesting thing about essential oils is they tend to be quite flammable. So we think of sagebrush as being a plant that isn't very well adapted to fire, and yet once fire starts on it, it will kind of almost explode because of those terpenes in the plant. They're quite flammable. There's a whole series of compounds that cause photosensitization or sensitivity to sunlight. They can do things such as causing swelling in the head and the ears. There's a disease or a condition called big head in sheep. If sheep eat too much of some of these compounds, their head will swell up. It can cause swelling of the skin and sloughing of the skin when it's exposed to the sun. What actually happens is that most of the death or the problems on livestock in the West are created because these compounds cause damage to the liver. They prevent the liver from breaking down certain compounds. So, for example, there's an accumulation of when chlorophyll goes into the gut, it is converted to another compound, chlorothalin, and if that accumulates, it is transported to the skin, and then it becomes photodynamic. So that chlorophyll-like compound again collects sun, and that collection or photodynamic state is what causes the animal to get sunburned. So oddly enough, it's mostly the fact that these photosensitive compounds make the liver less effective, that the compounds then go to the skin and cause this photosensitization. It can cause death in very high compounds. It does not usually cause illness, so it is hard for animals to learn through conditioned aversions to avoid these photosensitive plants. And there's a long delay between eating the food and then feeling the photosensitivity. A couple plants that are important in causing photosensitization are St. John's wort. That's an interesting one because it affects horses more than others. So people are often quite concerned about St. John's wort in horse pastures because horses can become quite photosensitized when they eat that plant. Horsebrush is a plant that I mentioned that causes big head in sheep. So I've seen this happen myself where sheep will eat this horsebrush and they have a swelling of the head. In this plant, it does resprout after fire. So when a fire goes through, all the sagebrush may be removed, and some of the first plants to come back might be horsebrush. And that's where we tend to have some problems with animals eating horsebrush because there's no other shrubs available after fire. A variety of dermatitis conditions can also be created when animals eat plants. You're probably familiar with this, like poison ivy. It's the toxins that are poisonous upon contact. So they don't even have to go through the system. They affect the skin defense system, so they cause pain. Animals avoid them. They're rarely lethal, but they certainly can cause significant production losses and really cause a lot of discomfort in animals. A few of the plants that we would attribute to having severe dermatitis effects would be poison ivy, poison sumac, and poison oak. And these are effective on nearly any mammal that comes in contact with them. Okay, so those are some of the plant compounds that cause problems in livestock management or wildlife habitat in the West. What can you do about it? How can you help animals avoid being poisoned? Well, the first thing is to make sure to provide adequate supply of good forage. We don't usually have problems with poisonous plants if there's plenty of forage alternatives. Make sure to provide salt and minerals because those can be compounds that help animals deal with toxins. Don't put hungry animals in pastures with abundant toxic plants. Those massive die-offs of sheep that I showed pictures of earlier, those were caused when hungry animals were put in pastures with abundant halogeton. So be careful with animals when you're moving them and the pasture that they're moved to if they're hungry. So be careful to introduce animals to new pastures that might have new foods in them. Do it when animals are in good body condition and slowly so they really can learn about plants. Be aware of conditions that create toxic plants and where those toxic plants are located in your pastures. Remember that some plants can be fine nearly all the time, and then you might have something like a freezing event or drought event that those plants might start to be toxic. So if you've got some of those plants, especially those that create nitrate, you need to pay attention to when they might be toxic or not. So there are a bunch of plants that are toxic. Some of the ones we've already seen would have toxic compounds in them, but we're going to focus on just two in this section of the class. There are two that are really widely recognized on rangelands, and they're ones that you should know as a rangeland manager. Okay, let's take a first look at tailcup lupin. There's a lot of lupins out on the range. If you recognize this lupin, you'll recognize others that you see because they all have similar characteristics. This one's perennial native. Its seed head is a raceme. Now we've had spike type seed heads. We've had panicle seed heads. I don't think we've had a raceme yet in this class. So this is a raceme type seed head. Racemes are when you have a small branch, a single branch between the main stem of the inflorescence and the flower. So just that one little branch that comes off of the main stem. That makes it a raceme. You can also see this called tail cup because the flower has a little tail on it. That's where the common name comes from. The flowers are blue or purple. They're often two different colors, as in this picture, and the leaves are distinctive because they're palmately compound. So these are compound leaves. The whole round part of the leaf is one, and they're bound together as if they were a hand or a palm. So what makes this plant dangerous? It contains alkaloids. Alkaloids are very powerful toxins on the range. I'm not sure why the plant started, producing toxins, maybe to ward off microbes or to ward off insects or grazing animals, but they do have strong effects on grazing animals. When an animal eats too much lupin, they might look nervous, they might excessively salivate. After a while of being fidgety and nervous, they'll become reluctant or lethargic. They'll become, just hanging around, reluctant to move. They might then eventually have difficulty breathing and twitching of leg muscles. Eventually, they'll lose muscle control, and they might lose muscle control of their lungs and start having trouble breathing, and then they'll go into convulsions. Worst case scenario, they'll go into coma and die. This is not that common. Not a lot of animals die of lupin. It takes a lot of lupin to kill ruminants anyways, but it certainly does happen. There are some lupins, not tailcup, but there are other lupins in the world that have a compound that creates birth defects. So you might have heard of crooked calf disease, and that's when the fetus inside of the animal is not able to move. The lupin, the toxins cause the fetus to quit moving, and then the joints fuse. So when the animal is born, they're crooked. Their legs are fused at the knees or at the neck or on the back. So it's a terrible disease that happens, especially in Washington. There's some areas that have the silver lupin that causes crooked calf disease. So lupins can cause birth defects. Some of those specific alkaloids are not found in tailcup lupin. Another deadly plant is tall larkspur. This is considered the most deadly plant for livestock in the West. It kills more livestock than any other plant. You might see on the map, sometimes you'll see Poison Creek. There's a lot of creeks called Poison Creek, and usually it's because there's this plant up that creek. And so this is the poison they're talking about. Perennial native, so it's native part of the environment. It also has a raceme type seed head. Its flowers are usually dark purple, and its leaves are palmately lobed. Now they're not compound, they're joined at the center, so they're not really completely compound, but they are lobed. Why is this plant so deadly? Partly because of those leaves. They're very green and leafy and desirable to animals. So animals eat them, but then after they eat them, the alkaloids affect them. So they might show signs like being nervous, they might have a rapid irregular pulse, they would be weak, they might be staggering, they often will fall down and just sit upright, uh, and of course they can die. This will cause death. So another interesting thing about this toxin is that if you see an animal that's having these signs, you don't want to you don't want to agitate it. You don't want to give it a lot of exercise because that actually intensifies the poison. It processes through the system faster, and you could cause death in a case where if the animal just laid down and took time to let the toxin go through its system. It's a water-bound toxin, so it'll eventually just process and get out of the system. But if you excite the animal, then it will become deadly. So again, this is the tall larkspur is the plant that kills more livestock than any other plant in North America. So there you have it, just a few ideas on how characteristics of plants make them either high or low in forage value and poisonous or not.